In the last video, we made this new post modal where you can do stuff and validate and do the whole thing. And this is good enough. Like, I would say start here. This is one of those times where I'm going to say, hey, just because I'm going to show you a more complicated way of doing something doesn't mean you need to complicate your app. In fact, I think this is a perfectly reasonable setup. Just like I think that delete button should just be a simple confirmation dialog, probably stick with this. But let me show you one con of this approach and then a way to, again, make it slightly more complex, but solve for that con. With this setup, every time, because this is part of our big Livewire component, anytime this does anything, when we hit a submission, it does a full Livewire request and re-renders the whole component. So let me show you what I'm talking about. If we open up the network tab and we partially fill in this post, and then we do some simple submission with validation. So it doesn't even add the post. It's fine and fast enough, but let's pretend that your component is huge. Ours is actually decent size because we have a modal in each of these rows. There's a lot of markup. When I did that simple form submission and got back a validation error, take a look in the Livewire request. You don't have to know about what we're sending and getting back, but there's this bit of HTML that comes back. This is all the rendered HTML for this component. So again, we did a simple little thing like hit enter to get validation on a single form and show a single bit of validation error. Well, it went back, it re-rendered the whole component, it re-queried all the posts from the database, and it rendered out all of that HTML. Like, it's a lot of HTML, and it won't even show me all the HTML because it's basically all the HTML of this page. So when you get into these scenarios where you want to break up a component into multiple, it can make sense. And I would recommend doing it when you need to save on resources. And you'll see the complexity it adds. It's a trade-off. You're trading off some complexity for a little bit more efficiency. So let's take this whole new post setup and put it in a dedicated Livewire component so that it's an island. If you didn't know that, I'm just going to keep talking about that in these series. Is that plural for series? We're going to keep talking about that, how components are islands. If this is a nested component, when this component re-renders or refreshes, it doesn't re-render this component unless you tell it to. And same thing with this component. If we create this a separate Livewire component, when we do something in here, it's only going to re-render itself. So that's advantageous in certain scenarios. So let's do it. Let's, let's start here. Here's show post. Here's this whole dialog. We're going to take this and put it inside a Livewire component, and we're going to call it add post dialog. That's going to be our component name. And then let's take all of these contents, put them in the clipboard, and this is the Livewire component we're going to create. So artisan make Livewire add post dialog. Okay. And now that just created a new Livewire component called add post dialog for us. And then let's open up that blade view. We're kind of skipping ahead. We're just going to open up the blade view, and I'm going to put all those contents in here. So you'll notice I kept this root div. You can technically do this, but I'm going to caution you against putting complicated things as the root element in a Livewire component. If you have a blade component as a root element, it can just get a little dicey because you don't know what's inside this blade component, what attributes it's adding to the root element. So just in general, if you can help it, just stick with a simple div or a simple wrapping element. Don't make a blade component the root of your component. It's just one less area to make mistakes. Okay, so we have that little bit. Let's open up add post dialog, the actual Livewire component, and then let's open up this show posts not there. Let's open it here, show posts. Okay, and we're going to take a bunch of this and just stick it into here. So this whole form, this show dialog, this add method, all of this can now live inside this component. And we just got to add those import statements as well. Let's add that import that use the create post. Okay, so we've imported everything. We've cleaned up this component so it doesn't care about adding posts at all. And we've shoved all that inside of our add post dialog. One random thing, this doesn't really matter. This says show add post dialog. It feels redundant now. Before that made sense because it was in a show post component. Now it's inside add post dialog. So let's just say show. We could just say show. Let's just leave it as show. I like that. And then we'll go inside add post dialog, that blade view, and instead of show add post, we'll just say show. So I like that. You can use open, you can use show. These are synonyms. Just try to be consistent. I'm not, but maybe you will be. Okay. Show is false, reset show. So we're good. This should actually work. Let's try it out. We hit new post. So this is a nested Livewire component. Let me just show you how you can tell. When you go into your HTML, Livewire components have a bunch of extra stuff that Livewire adds to their root elements. So this is the whole show post component. And now when we get to that button, there it is. It's an entirely separate nested component inside here. Okay, so we hit new post. We say some post. And let's just verify when we do this little just validation that fails validation, it made an update, but it's a lot smaller now. If we look at the HTML that got rendered, it's not actually truncating it for us anymore. It's showing us the full HTML because it's just the HTML that needs to be returned for that modal. You'll see there's the dialog, there's the close button, all that. So it's a lot lighter weight, and we didn't make a whole new database request for the whole parent component. It's pretty nice. So some post, some content, and then we hit save. So we got some post, right? And that's not in our list. We hit save. Okay, everything seemed to work, except it didn't show that new post at the bottom of our table here. Because again, components are islands. That's why I caution you against just nesting Livewire components willy-nilly, because they are islands. We did a whole thing in here, and it didn't impact the outer Livewire component at all. What we need it to do is after it's done adding a new post, we need to tell the parent component to refresh its posts. And there's lots of different ways to do this, but let me show you what I think is the simplest and most elegant. Inside add post dialog, after we actually add the new post and reset the dialog, let's do this. Let's dispatch an event called added. Okay. And now that we have this event, let's go into the show posts. So right here, we're inside our blade view for show posts, add post dialog. We can just listen for that event. So when added, and then you can call any method. We could say, whatever, we could have a method inside this show posts called close, or I don't know, refresh the page or whatever. But there's a magic method in Livewire called $refresh that you've probably seen. You can do it anywhere. If you wanted to add wire click here, $refresh, when you click this button, it'll just refresh the whole page. There's a synonym for it, commit, if you prefer that. But I think refresh is pretty intuitive. So this is nice. We have our nested Livewire component. We're saying, hey, if that component dispatches this added event, refresh our page. And that should be good. This syntax I actually added for this screencast because I was trying to figure out the best way to communicate, and it just felt a little heavy-handed. You could do something like inside add post dialog. There's a few different things you can do. I think you can add event listeners to render methods. Like you could say, added here, or maybe up here, or just create an empty method called added that does nothing and then listen for that event here, like on added. That would work. That would actually do, oh, I'm actually in the wrong, well, pretend that I put all this in the parent show posts component. But again, there's kind of issues with that. I don't like that it lives inside the class, and it would listen for the added event from any Livewire component basically on the page. So this is a way to just say, just listen for that event on this specific component. It's very readable. It's very intuitive. If you're used to Vue.js, you've probably seen it there. So we added that little listener, listen for added, call refresh, and let's just see if that works. We had some post, and now let's say some other post, some content, hit save, and there we go. It did the whole thing. It added the post, it refreshed our page. So there's one con that you should know about. We made another trade-off here. When we add a post, take a look at this. We add some post, and now we hit save. It did two network requests. The first one was to create the new post in that Livewire component and then call dispatch. It came back, and in its payload, it said, hey, dispatch the add method, or the added event. So it dispatches added. Then this parent listens for that event and then refreshes itself. So this one is just the parent refreshing itself. And on slow, it's normally not an issue. Like you didn't even notice it. But if we were on a really slow connection, we would notice it. If we went to do something and then we hit save, first it's going to take a second and save. Then it's going to take a second and refresh. But again, as long as you show loading states, this can be okay. because the user knows that the app is thinking. It's not just being janky, it's thinking, so it feels solid. There's one little thing I want to show you. If you didn't notice, we didn't add wire loading or anything on this slow connection. Let me make this empty so that we don't keep adding new posts. If I go to save this, it disables this button automatically. Any form element, when Livewire has wire submit on it, when the actual request is being submitted, Livewire will handle disabling any submit buttons for you. And it also adds a read-only attribute to all input elements so that the user, while it's waiting, it knows it's waiting and it can't like resubmit the form or modify the inputs or something like that. And let me show you one other step we can do to style this. So when we go to hit the save, it disables the button, and it does actually mark these inputs as read-only, but it doesn't look like it. Like if we try to modify them, we can't because it is read-only, but we don't have any user feedback. So let me just show you a tip that I like to do with my forms. So let's go into show posts, or no, we want add post dialog.blade, okay? And we'll find these input elements and let's add a few classes to the ends of them. So these two input elements, if we want to make the opacity 50 just to show that they're disabled or whatever, we can use this special Tailwind pseudo selector for read-only, that when it's marked as read-only, make opacity 50. And let's do another one here. Let's say read-only cursor not allowed. And that's going to disable the cursor and show like a red or like an X symbol when we hover over it. And I actually did this on this button to show a disabled state. I added opacity 50 and cursor not allowed. I didn't tell you about it, but now I'm telling you about it. All right, so let's see this in action. Get back to a fast network, open the post, okay, and then slow the network down a bunch, type something in here. And now if we hit save, everything's disabled and our cursor is not allowed. So it feels very much like a user safe thing. It gives them, it actually prevents them from doing harmful things, and it shows them helpful loading states, UI bits that help them to just know that something's happening and that the app is working. All right, so that's kind of a little bit of a lesson in nesting components in general. That's really what it is. This doesn't have a ton to do with our modal, but this is what I would do if I were to create an entirely nested component just for a button that opens a modal on a page. So there you go. I'll see you in the next video.